Hey guys, tonight we slip the surly barns of 2025 and shuffle, slipper-footed, into 14th century Paris, where the air smells of wood smoke, wet stone, and the faintest suggestion of horse. You probably wouldn't survive a week here without Wi-Fi, coffee, or plumbing, but that's half the fun, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I like picturing all these quiet little lights darting the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The cobbles are slick with evening drizzle as you materialize just upstream of Pont-au-Change, the river licking the arches like a cat grooming its paw. A widely accepted historical fact, Paris boasted nearly 200,000 souls by 1328, making it the largest city in Europe, west of Constantinople. A curious side note, city officials hung iron cages from this very bridge to display the severed arms of bakers who short-weighted bread, an early, if literal, consumer protection scheme. Somewhere ahead, a bell in the aisle's shadow tolls 9, and you feel the tug of an unanswered question. How did anyone navigate these alleys after dark without a phone, a flashlight, or at least glow-in-the-dark shoelaces? You tug your cloak. Rough wool, suspiciously itchy, tight across your chest and step toward the glow of a tallow dip that flickers above a doorway. The smell is equal parts French fry nostalgia and medieval despair, but it beats tripping into the Seine. An established fact, street lighting did not exist. Householders were obliged to keep a candle in the window on penalty of a fine, giving the city the twinkling uncertainty of a half-decorated Christmas tree. A forgotten custom. If you approached a stranger after curfew, you were required to announce yourself with the polite formula, "À moi, loyal." "It's me, friendly," which worked about as well as spam filters in the 1990s. The debate among scholars, did that greeting ever calm anyone? Or was it simply an early form of podcast intro, comforting noise before the inevitable chaos? Your breath puffs small ghosts into the chill as you shuffle past a pair of watchmen warming their hands over a clay pot of coals. They eye your foreign sneakers, turn shoes, but let you pass. Apparently the cloak is convincing. You catch a snatch of their conversation, something about the abbess's new girls and belts that gleam like reliquary gold. And there it is, the first breadcrumb of tonight's sleepy mystery, glinting in the corner of your mind brighter than any street lamp. A well-documented detail, royal accounts record frequent, oddly specific payments to dames de belle cinture, ladies of the fine belt. A tidbit most wouldn't know, the belts were sometimes paid for in pepper, more valuable than gold by weight, and presumably harder to explain to the queen. The uncertainty in the record, whether the king reimbursed the pepper from his private purse, or the spice came straight from the palace larder, leaving court cooks to wonder why every dish suddenly tasted like austerity. Ahead, the lane narrows until the upper stories almost kiss. Someone above empties a basin, and you skip sideways just in time, heart skittering like a dropped tambourine. You're beginning to understand why guidebooks, had they existed, would rate Paris 0 stars, bring tetanus shot. Yet the city thrums with a life that feels oddly welcoming, the way a crowded subway car can feel friendly if you ignore the sweat. An established fact, by municipal decree, every parish had to maintain a communal pig who roamed the streets devouring refuse, an oinking public service announcement. An odd anecdote, one such pig, Bijou, was allegedly trained to untie laces with his snout and thus expose ankles for a fee, an early example of porcine entrepreneurship. The mystery historians still puzzle over who exactly collected Bijou's earnings, and did he declare them? You pause beneath a wooden sign painted with a single white rose, petals curling like old parchment. From inside drifts the murmur of dice, a woman's laugh, and the sweet, metallic scent of hot wine. Somewhere in there, a golden belt waits, maybe on a hip, maybe in a story, maybe only in the wishful thinking of a king who should have been in bed hours ago. You flex your toes, feeling the chill seep through worn leather, and decide that one more doorway can't hurt. After all, the night is young, the bells have stopped, and history, like insomnia, is rarely in a hurry. A hand, warm, perfumed with rosewater and a whiff of wood smoke, lands lightly on your sleeve and steers you into the doorway's amber glow. You glance down, a belt of soft leather, yes, but the buckle, oh, the buckle, gleams like a tiny sunrise, thick enough to dent a loaf of bread. A generally acknowledged truth. Parisian courtesans of the late Middle Ages were required to wear some visible token of their trade, often a sash or girdle, so patrolmen could distinguish commerce from courtship without peering too closely into anyone's moral ledger. A curious side note, the gold itself was sometimes gilded brass, but the city's assay office, yes, they had one, still logged every ounce as though monarchs themselves might pop in for a way-in. The open question, were the belts truly meant for royal retrieval after prayers, or did inventive storytellers simply prefer a shiny breadcrumb to a boring old map? The woman, Saint Susanna, you're told, because aliases here are half devotion, half in joke, leans close enough for you to count the tiny pearls stitched to her coif. She smells of iris and buttered toast, a combination so disarmingly domestic, you almost forget why you're here. An established fact, licensed brothels in 14th century Paris operated under the lax but lucrative oversight of the Chatelet court, whose clerks kept ledgers that read like grocery lists of sin. A forgotten custom, newcomers were offered a thimble of warm wine sweetened with honey, part hospitality, part stealth sobriety test. If you spilled, you were deemed too clumsy for the premium packages. Debate among scholars. Did the wine serve social bonding, or merely line the house's coffers by loosening purse strings faster than laces? You accept the thimble, letting the honey linger on your tongue while your eyes adjust to lamplight that paints everything the color of late afternoon nostalgia. Susanna taps her belt buckle twice. The metal gives a soft clink, the sound of distant coins settling at the bottom of a wishing well. A well-documented detail. Many buckles were engraved with the wearer's chosen saint, a spiritual insurance policy against both pox and prosecution. An odd anecdote. One courtesan reportedly had hers blessed by 3 different priests in a single afternoon, like triple layering sunscreen, only for the soul. The uncertainty in the record, whether any cleric refused the fee, or if the sacrament came with a wink and a sliding scale. Across the room, a man in a clerk's ink-stained cuff loses his dice, his purse, and, judging by his sigh, possibly his thesis on moral philosophy. You feel the tug of stories stacking like nesting dolls, each one promising another secret if you just stay awake a little longer. Susanna notices your gaze and smiles the way moonlight touches water, all surface, depths implied. She hooks her thumb under the belt, letting the gold catch the flame, and asks whether you'd like to hear how kings find their way home after dark. You nod, even though you're no king, because everyone tonight is someone else anyway. A generally accepted historical fact, Charles Roman VII, the well-served, kept irregular devotional hours, slipping from chapel to city on foot, eschewing heralds. A tidbit most wouldn't know, royal confessors were instructed to carry spare hose in case His Majesty's midnight strolls ended in puddles deeper than remorse. The mystery historians still puzzle over, did the king ever wander unbelted, anonymous, just another soul looking for a warm corner in which to lay down the weight of crown-shaped insomnia? The room sways gently, as though the building itself breathes. Somewhere a lute string hums, loosening in the warmth. You realize the hum matches your own pulse, steady, unhurried, the tempo of stories that refuse to end just because the listener might nod off. Susanna leans in, breath warm against your ear, and begins, when the bells fall silent. The sentence hangs, half-spun silk, and you feel the night tip forward into legend. You follow the clerk's defeated shrug and Susanna's tug, slipping out a side door into the chill of a narrow passage that smells of damp limestone and yesterday's incense. Somewhere ahead, the king. Yes, the actual, inconveniently mortal king, has just finished his prayers at St. Chapelle and is strolling toward the river with the nonchalant air of a man who believes curfews apply to other people. A common historical agreement, Charles Roman VII habitually attended late-night offices, preferring the privacy of a near-empty chapel where the saints outnumbered the spies. A curious side note, he reportedly carried his own taper, claiming royal candle snuffers made too much noise, an early case of DIY mindfulness. The unanswered question, did he seek solitude, or merely a quiet corner to rehearse the next day's lies? Your shoes. Well, someone's shoes. Whisper over flagstones as you shadow the tiny procession. King, confessor, two bodyguards trying to look like bored merchants. Susanna's fingers rest on your elbow, steering you through the dark with the confidence of a cat navigating a shelf of glassware. An established fact, royal bodyguards wore plain cloaks to avoid advertising the jackpot beneath, a strategy that worked unless you counted the way they walked, spines straight as exclamation points. A forgotten custom, any citizen who recognized the king was obliged to pretend otherwise unless he spoke first. Parisians treated monarchs like surprise birthdays, acknowledged too early, and you ruined the cake. Scholars still debate, did this etiquette spare embarrassment or merely give everyone plausible deniability come tax season? Around a corner the Seine glints, a black ribbon shot through with reflected torchlight from the grand chatelet. The king pauses, murmurs something that might be scripture or might be last week's cricket scores. Latin makes everything sound holy. You catch a whiff of beeswax and damp fur, the smell of monarchy trying not to catch cold. Susanna's belt buckle taps your thigh, a Morse code you can't read but somehow understand. Wait. A well-documented detail, royal confessors carried small vials of holy water repurposed as breath freshener, proof that holiness and halitosis share an uneasy border. An odd anecdote. One confessor kept a pet mouse in his sleeve for luck. It escaped during a midnight absolution and nested in the Queen's wig before morning. The uncertainty in the record, whether the mouse later received a pension. The king moves on, boots splashing through a puddle that flashes like a coin before swallowing itself. You consider the cosmic joke. Centuries from now, tourists will snap selfies here, unaware that a man with a crown once stood exactly where a pigeon just pooped. Susanna exhales a laugh so soft it might be your own thought escaping. She tilts her head toward a recessed doorway where lamplight pools like spilled cream. Somewhere inside, a belt of gold waits to guide a monarch home. Outside, the city holds its breath, counting footsteps the way insomniacs count sheep. An established fact, Charles Roman 7 household accounts list repeated charitable donations made between Compline and dawn, sums generous enough to fund a modest monastery. A tidbit most wouldn't know, the same scribe annotated one entry with a doodle of a belt, as though even the ledger needed reminding what the money bought. The mystery historians still puzzle over, did the king's generosity purchase grace, discretion, or merely directions back to the palace before sunrise embarrassed them all? The river mutters against its stone banks, a lullaby older than any monarchy. You feel the night settle onto your shoulders like a cat that has decided you are furniture, warm, weighty, oddly reassuring. Ahead, the king's taper shrinks to a spark, then flares as he turns a corner toward whatever version of home waits when the prayers are finished and the belt begins to shine. The king's taper vanishes, and you're left with Susanna's hand on the small of your back, guiding you into a lane so narrow the sky looks like a ribbon someone forgot to trim. Cobbles glisten with runoff from 1,000 gutters. Your nose catalogues fish, tar, and the sweet ghost of morning bread that hasn't been baked yet. A generally acknowledged truth, medieval Parisian streets averaged 6 feet wide, the exact width of 2 sheep, 1 cart, and 0 consenting traffic laws. A curious side note, residents flung dirty water outward only after shouting "Gare, Ello." The original spoiler alert, though timing remained subjective. The debate among scholars, did the shout reduce accidents or merely upgrade them from surprise to negotiated collision? You sidestep a rivulet that might be rainwater, might be something warmer, and feel Susanna's chuckle vibrate through her fingertips. She points to a doorway where a single white rose is chalked onto the lintel, its petals already blurring under the mist. An established fact, such symbols served as a quiet directory for visitors who couldn't read Latin, or anything, turning the city into a picture book for the libidinous. A forgotten custom, if you tapped the rose twice and waited, a small panel slid open at eye level, revealing nothing but candlelight and an eyebrow raised in fiscal inquiry. Historians still argue, was the eyebrow standardized, or did each house cultivate its own signature arch of skepticism? Inside, the corridor smells of hot linen and clove-studded apples, a combination that makes you nostalgic for Christmases you've never lived. Susanna unhooks her cloak, revealing the belt again, leather softened by years, gold bright as a promise that intends to be broken gently. A well-documented detail, many courtesans inherited their belts from retiring predecessors, passing them down like varsity jackets embroidered with centuries of scandal. An odd anecdote, one belt supposedly carried a dent made by a royal tooth during an over-enthusiastic picnic. The lady charged extra to show the imprint, claiming it was a holy relic of tenderness. The uncertainty in the record, whether the king in question ever asked for royalties, or simply a refund on the cheese. You emerge into a courtyard where laundry flaps like gossip overhead, white sheets, crimson ribbons, a single black stocking that waves like a surrender flag to propriety. Susanna explains the code without words. White for welcome, red for engaged, black for mourning or dramatic flair, depending on the moon. An established fact, municipal statutes required licensed houses to display a lantern after curfew, turning the courtyard into a constellation you could navigate by touch and wallet. A tidbit most wouldn't know, The lantern glass was sometimes tinted pink with berry juice, giving every complexion the forgiving glow of a forgiving memory. The unanswered question, did patrons notice the trick, or did they simply attribute their sudden attractiveness to divine intervention? Somewhere above, a shutter creaks and a woman yawns, the sound stretching like a cat that owns the entire night. You feel the city lean closer, breath warm against your neck, whispering that if you keep walking, you'll eventually arrive at a story you can retell in the morning. Edited for decency, of course. Susanna's buckle clinks once, a tiny bell calling the next hour to order, and you follow the sound deeper into the maze. Feet memorizing turns your mind will never need to recall. A low archway opens into a lamplit room that smells of beeswax, old parchment, and the faintest whiff of violet ink. Rows of ledgers line the walls like sleepy soldiers. A single abacus clicks softly as a nun, yes, an actual nun, slides beads with the efficiency of someone settling accounts for God and the tax man at once. A widely accepted historical fact, by 1360 Paris licensed prostitution under a quasi-conventual structure, complete with an elected abbess who negotiated rents, bail, and the occasional dowry. A curious side note, the abbess could sue clients for non-payment in civil court, making her perhaps the world's first female debt collector with both rosary and receipts. The mystery historians still puzzle over, did the city invent the title to placate the church, or did the church humor the city to keep sin alphabetized? Susanna dips a curtsy that manages to be both deviant and devout, then slips behind you, leaving the nun and you in a polite stare-off. Sister Mathilda. Her name floats across like a paper airplane, tilts her head toward a stool. You sit. The wood is warm, implying a long shift of celestial bookkeeping. An established fact, convent brothels or brothel convents, depending on your branding, filed quarterly reports that read like farmers' ledgers, bushels of sin, weather forecasts for lust. A forgotten custom, each new girl was registered under a saint's name, ensuring that when the bishop called for statistics, he got hagiography instead of head counts. Scholars debate, did this sanctify the trade or merely give the clergy plausible spell check? Mathilda opens a ledger so thick it could double as a siege door and points to an entry annotated with a tiny belt drawn in the margin. Her fingernail, ink smudged, taps the line, to His Majesty, 1 golden girdle, 3 livers Parisies, paid in peppercorns. You lean closer, noticing a second note fainter, deliver after compline. A well-documented detail, Palace Spice accounts of the same week record an unexplained debit of exactly 3 livers worth of pepper, suggesting someone bartered seasonings for seduction. An odd anecdote. Court cooks later complained the royal stew tasted curiously virtuous, as though virtue were a flavor profile between sage and regret. The uncertainty, whether the pepper came from the king's private stash or the kitchen's rainy day tin, either way, dinner blushed. Mathilda closes the book with a sound like a soft verdict and hands you a token, thin brass stamped with the same belt symbol. It's warm from her palm, and you realize you've just been receipted by a nun for potential sin, a paperwork paradox that makes your eyelids heavy with wonder. An established fact, clients sometimes collected these tokens as proof of charitable donation, allowing them to deduct vice from virtue on whatever cosmic tax form awaited them. A tidbit most wouldn't know, a cache of such tokens was found in 1877 beneath a cellar floor, arranged in the shape of a heart, someone's memento or perhaps a very literal accounting of affections. The open question, did the accountant ever balance that heart, or is the debt still accruing interest in some celestial ledger? The nun blesses you. Quick, businesslike, the spiritual equivalent of stamping a passport, and gestures toward a curtained doorway. Beyond it, a corridor smells faintly of incense and new bread, the kind of corridor that promises either absolution or a nap. You pocket the token, feel its edges settle against your fingers like a secret you're too tired to confess, and step forward, trusting the next footfall to find a story soft enough to sleep on. The corridor exhales warm air and the yeasty hush of rising dough as you pass a slit of a kitchen where a boy in a flour-dusted cap tends a brick oven. You pause, part hunger, part hypnotic need to watch something uncomplicated and round become golden. A generally acknowledged truth, licensed brothels baked their own bread to avoid the city's after-dark ban on commercial deliveries, turning every house into a clandestine bakery. A curious side note, the same ordinance allowed spiritual refreshment to be carried in at any hour, so wine, wafers, and occasionally choir boys slipped through the same side door. The debate among scholars: did city fathers fear hunger or holiness more once the gates were locked? Susanna reappears at your elbow, trades the nun's token for a palm-sized loaf so fresh it sighs when broken. Steam curls up, carrying the smell of comfort and carbohydrates in equal measure. An established fact, bread was served to patrons as both welcome and timer. When the loaf cooled, the hour was deemed over, a medieval snooze button you could chew. A forgotten custom, guests who left crusts uneaten risked a surcharge for wasteful hesitation, proving stinginess could be priced by the crumb. Historians still argue, did anyone ever request a second loaf to extend the stay, or did pride demand they pretend indifference to carbs? You nibble, letting the soft center melt on your tongue while the boy flips the next batch, each loaf landing with the soft thud of possibility. A well-documented detail, house ledgers list flour purchases beside perfume and lamp oil, budgeting for calories alongside seduction. An odd anecdote: one baker's boy became so prized for his brioche that a countess tried to buy his contract, planning to install him in her townhouse as a breakfast pet. The uncertainty, whether the abbess counter bid with a bag of pepper and 2 silk belts, or simply raised his wage by a loaf a week. Beyond the kitchen arch, a stair spirals upward, each step bowed by centuries of cautious feet. Susanna gestures. The upper floor houses the chapel pew corridor where belts are exchanged, stories sealed, and occasionally prayers murmured by people who know heaven keeps receipts. You wipe crumbs from your chin, suddenly aware that every stair you climb is buttered with someone else's secret, and that secrets, like bread, are best consumed warm. An established fact, the house maintained a tiny altar to St. Mary Magdalene, patron of perfumed penitents, stocked with candles paid for by belt tax. A tidbit most wouldn't know: patrons could light a candle for double the cost of a loaf, thereby buying both warmth and optics. The open question, did the flame count toward indulgence or merely toward ambience? Could salvation be metered by the hour like a parking space? Halfway up, you pause to let a woman descend. Her belt is silver, not gold, indicating apprentice status or perhaps a Tuesday discount. She smiles, flour still dusting her sleeve, proof she's just come from the same fragrant furnace below. Time feels porous here, like bread left too near an open window, and you resist the urge to ask her century. Everyone tonight is from somewhere slightly off the calendar. Susanna's hand returns to the small of your back, gentle pressure urging you upward, and you follow, carrying the last bite of loaf like a passport stamped temporary, edible enough. At the top of the stair, a narrow corridor lined with pegs holds a quiet parade of belts, gold, silver, brass, one lonely copper glinting like a forgotten penny. Each hangs at the height of its owner's hip, a silent census of wastes and willingness. A widely accepted historical fact, the house inventory of 1387 lists 43 belts valued collectively at more than the building itself, making wearable real estate literally wearable. A curious side note, apprentices polish the buckles with a paste of bread crumbs and wine, recycling last night's comfort into tomorrow's shine, early sustainable sin. Scholars still debate, did the shine attract patrons or merely keep the girls busy enough to avoid philosophical spirals? Susanna lifts her own belt from its peg, and you notice a small notch on the inner leather, a discreet scar. She catches your glance and shrugs. Payment plan, one prayer at a time. An established fact, some women bought their freedom in installments, each royal gift or wealthy patron shaving a sliver off the debt, like layaway for liberty. A forgotten custom, on the final payment, the abbess snipped a tiny circle from the strap, threading it onto a communal chain kept in the chapel, freedom reduced to confetti you could jingle. Historians puzzle, was the chain a trophy, a tally, or simply the world's most cynical charm bracelet? You follow her into a chamber barely wider than a confessional, its walls upholstered with faded tapestry showing David eyeing Bathsheba, biblical product placement. A small table holds quill, ink, and a ledger labeled "Sow Hates," wishes. A well-documented detail, patrons could write an anonymous desire, pay a denier, and have the note tucked behind the tapestry. Once a year the scraps were burned, sending smoky aspirations heavenward like spiritual junk mail. An odd anecdote, an archaeologist in 1924 found a surviving scrap reading simply "Let her remember me," signed with a doodle of peppercorns. Taste as mnemonic. The uncertainty, did any wish ever loop back fulfilled, or did the smoke merely season the next batch of bread? Susanna offers you the quill. The feather is goose, trimmed by someone left-handed, you can tell by the slant. You consider writing something profound, settle for "May the night be soft," and fold the paper twice, the way your grandmother taught you to trap luck. An established fact, over 300 wishes were recorded nightly at peak, proving hope scales like any industry. A tidbit most wouldn't know, girls sometimes read the notes aloud after hours, betting raisins on which wishes came from married men. Voice cracks were the tell. The open question, does hope retain value once commodified, or is it like bread left out, crusting at the edges? She slips your wish behind Bathsheba's woven ankle, pats the tapestry smooth, and suddenly the room feels finished, as though you've signed a contract whose terms are understood only by moonlight. Somewhere below, the oven door thuds, a heartbeat of heat, and you realize you're already halfway into tomorrow, carried by the soft machinery of other people's dreams. The tapestry sighs back into place, and Susanna turns, candle in hand, guiding you through a final doorway onto a tiny balcony that overlooks the courtyard you crossed earlier. Laundry now glows moon-white, the black stocking gone, claimed by wind or perhaps by someone with a matching sense of surrender. A generally acknowledged truth, Parisian nights average 45 degrees in April, cold enough to nip but warm enough to keep hope alive, like a parent who lets you stay up late but withholds snacks. A curious side note, Courtesans believed a wish written on paper cooled faster than one spoken aloud, so balconies doubled as refrigeration for prayers. Patrons left with pockets full of chilled intention. The debate among scholars: does delayed hope ferment into regret, or simply age into something drinkable? Below, the lantern still burns pink, but its flame has lowered, curling like a cat settling into one last dream. An established fact: curfew patrols rarely entered the courtyard if they saw the abbess's lantern untouched, accepting the glow as a treaty flag between law and appetite. A forgotten custom: guards sometimes tossed up a coin for a quick blessing, literally paying indulgence on the installment plan, then continued their rounds lighter in purse, heavier in semantics. Historians still argue, was the bribe for the women or for their own peace of mind, and which costs more in the long run? Susanna rests her forearms on the railing. The gold buckle clinks softly against stone, a sound like dice deciding to behave. She whispers that the king passed this spot an hour before you arrived, paused exactly where you're standing, and left a fingerprint of beeswax on the rail. A well-documented detail: palace accounts list one votive taper, midnight use, St. Chapelle surplus, proving even monarchs recycle. An odd anecdote: the wax mark remained visible for decades, reportedly growing warmer whenever a sincere wish hovered nearby. Tourists in the 1800s swore by it, rubbing pennies against the rail for luck until the stone wore smooth. The uncertainty: did the heat come from royal residue or from collective longing thick enough to melt time? You place your own thumb beside the invisible print, feeling nothing but cool stone and the faint pulse in your fingertips. An established fact: touch triggers oxytocin, the same hormone released by trust, music, and freshly baked bread. Essentially, you're drugging yourself with history. A tidbit most wouldn't know: girls here greeted dawn clients with a quick press of the hand to the rail, borrowing yesterday's sincerity to flavor today's negotiation. The open question, once borrowed: does sincerity accrue interest, and who collects when the debt comes due? The moon slips behind a cloud, dimming the courtyard into a charcoal sketch. Somewhere a bell, smaller than Notre Dame's, bigger than conscience, tolls once, twice, a lazy count that feels like a lullaby miscounting sheep. Susanna's shoulder brushes yours, warm through wool, and you realize you're no longer cold, merely suspended between the chill you remember and the warmth you're too sleepy to name. Below, the pink lantern steadies, then lowers its flame another breath, as though the night itself is turning down the page to mark where the story will resume. Later, softer, with you not entirely sure you ever left. The final bell fades, leaving a hush so complete you hear the candle's wick sipping tallow like a cat at a saucer. Susanna straightens, stretches, and, without asking, unhooks her golden belt, folding it once before pressing the warm leather into your hands. A generally acknowledged truth: courtesans rarely entrusted their girdle to anyone unpaid, but dawn shifts the economy toward gestures that can't be invoiced. A curious side note: legend claims a belt held by a stranger overnight absorbed all the night's restless dreams, returning lighter by morning, debt paid in sleep. The debate among scholars: does symbolic weight have mass, and if so, who carries the difference until morning? The buckle, still body warm, rests against your palm like a heartbeat that's forgotten whose chest it belongs to. An established fact: many buckles bore the Paris mint mark, proof the crown regulated even sin's metallurgy, ensuring every temptation met finest standards. A forgotten custom: A temporary holder was required to whisper one true thing to the metal before sunrise, a sort of confession that never reached clergy, early voice mail to the universe. Historians still argue, did the practice improve truth-telling elsewhere, or merely give the buckle a gossip problem? You search for a true thing and settle on, "I'm not sure I want to leave," the sentence slipping out as steam, visible for a second then gone. Susanna smiles the small, conspiratorial smile of someone who has heard every variation of reluctance and knows they all mean the same thing. Stay soft, stay safe, stay story. A well-documented detail. House records show patrons occasionally slept in the corridor on straw pallets rather than brave the pre-dawn city, paying half rate for the illusion of protection. An odd anecdote. One merchant asked to be woken by the smell of bread instead of a knock. They slid a fresh loaf under his nose at dawn, and he reportedly married the baker's girl within the month. Proof carbohydrates can double as matchmakers. The uncertainty, whether the marriage counted as interest on his original payment, and who compiles that amortization table. She guides you back inside, past the now quiet ledger room, to a nook no wider than a wardrobe, its window cracked so the city leaks in, distant river slap, a rooster who hasn't consulted the hour. An established fact, roosters in medieval Paris were tolerated despite noise ordinances, because they doubled as alarm clocks for a population that couldn't agree on time. A tidbit most wouldn't know, girls tossed crusts to the birds so they'd crow nearer the house, giving patrons an excuse to linger until first light without admitting fear of the dark. The open question, does manipulating the dawn constitute fraud, or simply hospitality taken to ornithological lengths? Susanna folds a blanket that smells of lavender and old smoke, tucks it around you, then pauses, hand on the door frame, before blowing out the candle. In the sudden charcoal dark, the belt in your hands glows faintly, polished by centuries of palms that needed something to hold when the world got too sharp. You hear her whisper, more breath than voice, "Return it at sunrise," though both of you know sunrise is a suggestion here, not a deadline. The last thing you sense is the faint click of the latch, the room settling into itself, and the buckle warming against your chest as though it, too, has decided to dream. Darkness thickens into a soft, breathing thing, and the buckle's faint gleam drifts like a firefly too polite to buzz. You lie on the straw-stuffed pallet, blanket pulled to your chin, listening to the house settle, timbers creaking the way old knees talk before rain. A widely accepted historical fact, medieval houses expanded and contracted with temperature, creating a nightly symphony known as the Wood Confession. A curious side note, courtesans claimed the creaks spelled patrons' names, a sort of Yelp review in Morse code for the attic mice. The debate among scholars, did anyone ever decode their own name, or was the boast simply early branding for repeat business? Your breathing slows to match the rhythm below, someone humming a lullaby that might be Latin, might be laundry day. An established fact, lullabies across Europe shared similar descending thirds, a melodic sigh neurologists now link to slowed heart rates in listeners, medieval asthma. A forgotten custom, girls hummed the same tune while polishing buckles, imbuing metal with lullaby vibrations they swore calmed rowdy clients. Historians still argue, can sound linger in gold the way light lingers in linen? And if so, who hits replay? The belt rests over your ribs like a small, agreeable cat that has decided purring is overrated. You thumb the inner notch again, feeling the slight ridge where a sliver was once snipped for freedom. A well-documented detail, freed women sometimes kept the notch circle as a pendant, wearing their own absence like a coin minted by the self. An odd anecdote. One woman sewed hers into her wedding dress a decade later, telling the priest it was a family heirloom. Technically true if you count yourself as family. The uncertainty. Does carrying proof of past transactions bless or burden the next chapter? Outside the cracked window, the city finally quiets. No footsteps, no rooster, just the river slapping stone like a reader closing a book again and again. An established fact, water's rhythm averages 60 beats per minute, coincidentally the resting heart rate of a calm adult, which is why dark-side neighborhoods slept better despite the noise. A tidbit most wouldn't know, courtesans timed breathing exercises to the river, inhaling for 3 slaps, exhaling for 4, a proto-meditation app you couldn't drop in the Seine. The open question, if bodies sink to water, and water sinks to moon, who gets the final edit on your heartbeat? You feel your thoughts loosen, sliding toward the edges of the palate like warm honey off a spoon. Somewhere in the house a door latches softly, the sound of stories clocking out for the night. The belt against your chest rises and falls, rises and falls. A tiny tide that has decided the moon is your ribcage. You think you hear Susanna's voice, maybe real, maybe echo, whispering record what you can. But the sentence blurs into the wood confession, the lullaby, the river, until all that's left is the gentle weight of someone else's gold keeping your own dreams from floating away. Somewhere between the river's heartbeat and your own, sleep arrives like a guest who never knocks, soft, inevitable, already familiar. The pallet beneath you seems to exhale, straw settling into the shape of someone who has lain here before and will lie here again, history repeating itself in the language of hips and shoulders. A generally acknowledged truth, medieval straw was changed quarterly, less for hygiene than for luck. Fresh straw meant fresh custom, proving superstition could be swept in with a broom. A curious side note, girls saved a handful of old straw to burn on feast days, the smoke said to carry last year's secrets skyward like reverse snow. The debate among scholars, does smoke remember what it consumes, or does confession simply change states from solid to air? In the hush, the buckle resting on your sternum grows heavier, not oppressive, but grounding, like a librarian's hand ensuring you don't reshelve yourself in the wrong century. An established fact, gold activates skin thermoreceptors, slightly lowering cortisol levels, royal bling as proto-weighted blanket. A forgotten custom. Wearers believed the metal should touch bare skin at least once during the night to swap temperatures with fate. A phrase no one copyrighted because no one survived long enough to collect. Historians still argue, is lowered stress measurable in records, or did scribes simply stop complaining once they could afford better ink? You drift deeper, and the room elongates into a dream corridor where laundry flaps like manuscript pages drying after an accidental spill of ink and time. A well-documented detail, REM sleep averages 90-minute cycles, roughly the same duration as a canonical office of prayer, complying to matins. So monks and dreamers once synced unintentionally. An odd anecdote. Courtesans claimed dreams experienced while borrowing a belt belonged partly to the buckle's original owner, creating communal sagas told over morning bread like serialized radio. The uncertainty, if dreams are joint custody, who edits the scary parts, sleeper, metal, or the night itself? The scent of rising dough sneaks up the stairs and curls into your dream, turning the corridor into a warm throat you walk down toward an oven that hums lullabies in Latin. An established fact, Smell is the sense most tied to memory. A single molecule of yeast can summon a childhood kitchen faster than any photograph. A tidbit most wouldn't know, house rules forbade strong perfume after 2 a.m., letting natural smells, bread, skin, river, recalibrate patrons' dreams toward homesickness and repeat business. The open question, does homesickness increase gratitude, or merely the willingness to pay for another night away? Just as the dream loaf reaches perfect brown, the oven door swings open, not onto fire but onto the pale gray of pre-dawn, and you realize the house is releasing you the way good stories release their listeners, gently before the ending, so you can imagine the rest while still half asleep. The buckle on your chest rises once more, then steadies, a tiny sun deciding whether or not to eclipse. You hover there, neither here nor there, feeling the exact moment when history tucks itself into your pocket and lets tomorrow take over the narration. A single cock crow, closer now, decided, cuts through the grey, and the buckle answers with a small metallic click as your breathing shifts from dream time to almost awake. You feel the pallet straw crunch beneath your shoulder blades, rearranging itself into a map of everywhere you've just been. A widely accepted historical fact, medieval Paris measured daybreak by the first market bell, not by sun, ensuring time obeyed commerce before astronomy. A curious side note, courtesans reset their hourglasses at that bell too, so the city's sin and sales began the new day in synchronized clinks, early multitasking. The debate among scholars, did shared time make sinners and sellers feel like colleagues, or did everyone just arrive late together? Somewhere below, a door thuds, followed by the soft shuffle of night soil men rolling barrels to the alley. History's earliest garbage collectors, paid by weight and discretion. An established fact, licensed houses paid a premium for the gentle crew who promised not to gossip about pepper-scented residue or monogrammed gloves found in odd bins. A forgotten custom. Girls left a heel of bread atop each barrel as thanks. The men, in return, erased footprints near side entrances with a quick sweep. Mutual aid disguised as sanitation. Historians still argue, did the bread ever get eaten, or did rats form the city's first union? You sit up slowly, blanket pooling at your waist, and the belt slides into your lap like a cat that knows breakfast is imaginary but affection is not. A well-documented detail, dawn holders were expected to return the girdle before first full light, ensuring the metal never absorbed too much civilian sun. Royal mystique preferred twilight reflections. An odd anecdote. One sleepy patron accidentally wore a belt home under his cloak. The abbess sent a runner to retrieve it, along with a bill for extra sunrise exposure, the medieval equivalent of roaming charges. The uncertainty, does sunlight dilute gold's authority or merely bleach the stories stuck to it? From the window crack, cool air slips in, carrying river breath, and the yeasty ghost of last night's bread now cooling in the courtyard baskets. An established fact, day-old bread was sold at a discount to beggars, creating a secondary economy of crumbs that fed both stomachs and rumors, charity flavored with yesterday's desire. A tidbit most wouldn't know, recipients sometimes broke the crusts in half, keeping one piece to trade for stories. An informal library where narrative replaced coin. The open question, which expires first, bread or the tale told over it, and does mold differentiate? You fasten the belt loosely around your own waist, just long enough to feel its borrowed heartbeat, then unclasp it. An embrace ended before either of you gets too attached. The buckle retains your warmth for 3 heartbeats, then yields to the room's chill metal teaching flesh about letting go. Footsteps approach, Unhurried, slippered, Susanna's silhouette framed by the stairwell's gloom, her palm already open to receive what was always only on loan. You place the belt across her fingers. She curls them, offers a nod that feels like a benediction whispered through eyelashes. Somewhere below, the pink lantern snuffs with a pop, and daylight, real, unfiltered, spills across the courtyard like a book finally opened to page one of tomorrow. Susanna slips the belt around her own waist, fastening the tongue into the familiar notch with a sound like a story snapping shut. She doesn't speak. Dawn contracts require silence, apparently, but her eyes flick to the courtyard where the first honest sunbeam is testing the laundry's resilience. A generally acknowledged truth, medieval daylight averaged a color temperature of 5,500 Kelvin, cool enough to expose sins written on skin, but warm enough to forgive them if you squint. A curious side note, girls check their reflections in copper basins at sunrise, believing the metal's first blush of day removed lingering lies, an early filter, no subscription required. The debate among scholars, does self-deception improve with better lighting, or does light simply upgrade the quality of the lie? You follow her down the stair, each step creaking a little lighter now that the belt has changed custody, would apparently relieved to carry only you instead of history plus accessories. An established fact, sound travels differently at dawn because temperature inversions bend waves. That's why early bells seem to come from inside your own head, useful if you need to preach to yourself. A forgotten custom, departing patrons time their exit with the first bell of the Cordeliers convent, letting monastic chimes mask the click of latches, sin and sanctity car pooling across the city. Historians still argue, did the monks notice the synchronized footfalls, or did they simply assume God had heavy heels? At the threshold, Susanna pauses, produces a small cloth pouch, and presses it into your palm. Light, rustling, smelling faintly of pepper and parchment. A well-documented detail, parting gifts often held a mix of crushed pepper and rose petals, a portable version of the house's scent signature, take-home branding before logos. An odd anecdote, one recipient brewed the mixture as tea, mistook the pepper for cinnamon, and wrote a poem so fiery it got him exiled from a literary salon, proof that misreading ingredients can upgrade your biography. The uncertainty, does the gift imply remembrance or receipt, and which is harder to redeem? You tuck the pouch into the same pocket that still holds the brass token from Sister Mathilda. Metal kisses dried flowers with a faint clink, commerce and grace sharing a coat like reluctant siblings. An established fact, pockets in medieval coats were internal, meant to keep valuables close to the heart. Early fanny packs with existential aspirations. A tidbit most wouldn't know, courtesans sometimes slipped a second pinch of pepper into the pouch as a silent wager that the patron would sneeze at an awkward moment back home. Small-scale karma delivered via nostril. The open question, if you sneeze in confession, does the sin count as aired or merely seasoned? The courtyard gate stands ajar, revealing an alley still blue with leftover night. Susanna lifts 2 fingers to her lips, half blessing, half hush, and eases the gate wider. The hinge gives a soft equine sigh, the sound of an era letting you out without asking where you'll go. You step through, boots finding wet cobble, and behind you the latch clicks with the politeness of someone closing a book they intend to reread later. Ahead, the first market cart rattles toward the quay, its driver humming a tune descended from last night's lullaby, proof that music, like gossip, changes costume but keeps walking. The alley spits you onto a broader lane where dawn mist swirls like milk in coffee no one bothered to stir. Your boots find the rhythm of the cart ahead, iron rim against stone, a heartbeat borrowed by strangers. A widely accepted historical fact, Parisian market carts were required to display a colored rag denoting their parish, turning pre-dawn streets into a silent parade of territorial flags. A curious side note, the rag's dye was often made from leftover wine lees, so the city's geography smelled faintly of last night's regrets. Mobile terre. The debate among scholars, did the colors prevent cartjacking, or did drivers simply enjoy announcing their hangover with heraldic pride? You fall in step behind the nearest cart, blue rag, St. Eustache, keeping distance enough to avoid hoof splash but close enough to borrow the tune the driver hums. An established fact, walking in sync elevates endorphins, the body's polite way of thanking you for pretending you belong. A forgotten custom, travelers matched the cadence of the first vehicle they encountered, believing the day's fortune would echo its cargo. Bread for abundance, fish for slippery outcomes, pepper for unexpected sneeze-level excitement. Historians still argue, does placebo count if you never learn whether the cart carried pepper or just smelled like it? A side breeze lifts, carrying river damp and the yeasty ghost of the house you just left. Proof that bread, like gossip, refuses to stay indoors. A well-documented detail, bakers often walked ahead of their own carts to air cool loaves, creating a breadcrumb trail Hansel would envy. Only instead of home you find breakfast. An odd anecdote, one baker's son scattered stale crusts to propose to a laundress. She followed the trail, accepted, then made him sweep the street. Romance with janitorial consequences. The uncertainty, did she love the boy or the promise of perpetual carbohydrates, and is there really a difference? You round a corner and spot the city gate ahead, portcullis raised like an eyebrow, surprised to see you upright this early. An established fact, gates opened at first light for honest laborers, a category loose enough to include anyone not carrying a siege engine. A tidbit most wouldn't know, guards kept a bowl of salted almonds for favored entries, protein-based bribe cheaper than coin but harder to audit. The open question, does accepting the nut place you in moral debt, or merely in culinary cahoots? The guard on duty, eyes still puffed with yesterday's shift, offers the bowl. You take one, taste smoke and last night's wine, and suddenly the city tastes like everyone you've just met distilled into a single almond. He waves you through, crunching his own portion, the two of you sharing breakfast without exchanging names, history reduced to a mutually agreed upon snack. Outside the walls, the road widens, carts fanning toward orchards and suburbs, each wheel singing the same minor key. You pause, pocket the shell bit of almond, and glance back once. The ramparts glow rose where sunrise hits, the color of Susanna's lantern fading into honest daylight, proof that every artificial pink eventually surrenders to real gold. The road outside unwinds like a ribbon someone tossed across green felt, hedges dew-pearled and humming with invisible bees. You walk because stopping feels abrupt, like hanging up mid-sentence on yourself. A widely accepted historical fact, leaving a medieval city before full sunrise granted travelers the legal status of dawn foot, exempt from overnight lodging tax, an early bird discount encoded in Latin. A curious side note, gate guards chalked a tiny sun on your sleeve to mark the status, a doodle that washed off by noon but let you brag about thrift until it faded. The debate among scholars, did the symbol reduce revenue or merely spread smugness faster than news could travel? Your shoes, still someone else's, squelch a little. The dew has found the seams where Parisian mud stowed away. An established fact, mud outside walls contained less sewage and more leaf litter than inside. A compositional upgrade that felt like moral improvement underfoot. A forgotten custom, travelers scraped a sample into a pouch as proof of pilgrimage, showing the folks back home they'd reached the hygienic frontier. Medieval fridge magnet tourism. Historians still argue, did anyone actually care about the mud? Or was collecting it an excuse to say you touched something cleaner than your conscience? A mile out, you pass a roadside shrine, stone virgin, paint peeled like sunburn, clutching a tiny belt someone offered in miniature, gold leaf flaking like butter on toast. A well-documented detail. Ex-courtesans occasionally donated their first buckle to roadside altars, converting currency into intercession faster than any exchange rate. An odd anecdote. One buckle kept falling off the statue's plaster fingers until locals declared it choosy, and only accepted prayers about fidelity, divine quality control. The uncertainty, does refusal count as miracle or mere metallurgical fatigue? You leave a pinch of your pepper rose blend at the shrine's base, figuring saints deserve souvenirs too, especially ones that sneeze. An established fact, pepper was once called grains of paradise, marketed as taste bud salvation for the culinarily damned. A tidbit most wouldn't know, parish records list respiratory miracles near pepper offerings, sneezes interpreted as demons exiting, proving allergy can masquerade as exorcism. The open question, if both demon and dream exit at once, which one do you miss more? Back on the road, the sun climbs high enough to burn the mist-off fields, revealing furrows striped like the abbess's ledger. You inhale, exhale, realize the city's weight has slid off your shoulders and pooled in your pocket as two tokens, some almond dust, and a story you haven't yet invented an ending for. Ahead, a fork appears, left toward villages, right toward forest. You stand at the divide, feeling the morning breeze sort your hair like a librarian who reshelves stray thoughts. Somewhere behind you, Paris bells ring for prime, the day's first proper office, sounding brighter than when you entered, proof that daylight, like forgiveness, is mostly a matter of timing. You take the right-hand fork because the forest promises shade, and the kind of quiet that lets a story finish itself without footnotes. Beech branches arch overhead, stitching the road into a tunnel of green shade that smells of last year's leaves and this morning's dew. A generally acknowledged truth, medieval forests within 10 miles of Paris were managed as coppice, every seventh oak left for shipwrights, creating a cycle of deliberate growth and grateful felling. A curious side note, travelers marked approved paths by tying a single strand of linen to low branches, an Instagram story made of actual linen. The debate among scholars, did the markers prevent people from wandering into royal hunting preserves, or merely advertise which outlaws were current on fabric trends? Your stride finds the same rhythm the cart had, left, right, pause, left, like your body is reluctant to let go of borrowed percussion. An established fact, walking cadence of 100-120 steps per minute optimizes oxygen efficiency, a pace highway engineers later copied for airport moving walkways. Your thighs are time traveling. A forgotten custom, if you heard a distant hunting horn, etiquette required you to answer by clapping twice, proving you were human, not venison, early capture. Historians still argue, did deer ever learn to clap, or was that simply the first iteration of fake news? A mile in, the path widens to a clearing where a charcoal burner's mound smolders, thin blue smoke curling like a question mark. A well-documented detail, Charcoal makers worked overnight to control oxygen levels, sleeping by their piles in rotating shifts. Medieval binge watching, but for fire. An odd anecdote. One burner claimed he could read the future in smoke curls, predicting a patron would sneeze riches weeks before pepper became currency. Career advice via combustion. The uncertainty. Did the prophecy self-fulfill? Or did the patron simply inhale ambition and season his own fate? You pause to warm your hands, though the morning isn't cold. More the idea of cold, the way memory can draft a chill across skin. An established fact, radiant heat from a charcoal mound averages 50 degrees C at one pace, perfect for reheating travel bread or regrets. A tidbit most wouldn't know, travelers pressed coins into the mound's outer clay for good luck. Once cooled, the coins were considered twice born and spent freely on indulgences, literal money laundering. The open question, does rebirth by fire cancel interest on previous sins, or simply recast them in brighter metal? Behind the mound, a stump serves as stool. You sit, pocket creaking, and realize the forest has muted Paris bells, prime fades, replaced by wood pigeon baritone. From your pocket you pull the brass token, the almond shell, the pouch of pepper rose. You line them up on the stump like miniature standing stones, a shrine to transactions you haven't named. A breeze stirs the linen markers overhead. One strand loosens, drifts down, and lands across the arrangement, parenthesis closing. Somewhere deeper in the trees, a horn sounds. 2 notes, pause, invitation or warning, hard to tell. You clap twice, mostly polite, pocket the relics, and stand. The path continues, but the clearing feels paused, waiting for you either to leave or to admit you already have. You step off the stump and the clearing exhales, as though it had been holding its breath since you sat. The horn doesn't repeat. Instead, a single hoof beat answers your clap, then stillness stitches itself back into the morning. A widely accepted historical fact, royal foresters rode only at dawn and dusk, times when shadows could be questioned without witnesses. A curious side note, their mounts wore padded hooves of felt and rope, muffling sound, an early stealth mode powered by wool. The debate among scholars, did the padding protect the king's deer, or merely preserve the illusion that the forest belonged to silence itself? The path narrows again, branches swiping your sleeves like editors demanding a cleaner draft of your silhouette. An established fact, beech bark scars under the slightest abrasion, recording passers-by in pale runes that last decades, arboreal gossip columns. A forgotten custom, travelers pressed a thumbprint into the soft bark while whispering their destination. Next visitors could read the ridge lines like braille for gossip. Historians still argue, did anyone change course based on a stranger's print, or was the gesture simply proto-graffiti with botanical consent? Ahead, light pools where a stream crosses the track, water bright as newly minted coin. A well-documented detail, forest streams within the royal domain were taxed by the bucket. Unauthorized watering of livestock incurred fines payable in pepper, hydration as luxury good. An odd anecdote, one farmer trained his donkey to sneeze on command, bartering peppery exhalations for water rights, respiratory barter at its finest. The uncertainty, did the donkey become a civil servant or merely an unwitting tax attorney? You kneel, cup a sip, taste cold iron and leaf tannin, the forest's idea of coffee. An established fact, cold water triggers the mammalian dive reflex, slowing heart rate by up to 10%, nature's snooze button. A tidbit most wouldn't know, courtesans who escaped city life carried miniature vials of stream water, dabbing temples during stressful negotiations, liquid proof that somewhere clerks didn't apply. The open question, if you bottle escape, does opening the vial release freedom or merely the memory of it? As you stand, a hoof print appears in the far bank, fresh, edged in silvered water. No rider visible, only the print filling drop by drop, erasing itself in real time. You feel the same soft erasure beginning in your thoughts, Paris, Susanna, Belt, Almond, all sliding toward the edges of recall. From your pocket you draw the brass token. Consider leaving it on a flat stone as tribute, then slip it back. Some stories need a physical ticket stub to prove they happened. Behind you, linen strips flutter in a breeze you can't feel, like applause you hear after you've left the theater. You walk on, each step quieter, as if the forest is teaching you how to leave without crunching the credits. The hoofprint refills, erases, and you move forward, boots soft on moss that's learned to muffle centuries of exits. Somewhere ahead, trees thin into a ride, a man-made slash where saplings stand like nervous understudies waiting for the oaks to call in sick. A generally acknowledged truth, Royal Forest rides were 8 feet wide, the exact breadth of 2 mounted hunters side by side, plus the wingspan of a startled pheasant. A curious side note, surveyors set the width using a standard rope soaked in salt water to prevent stretching, early quality control that also seasoned the soil. The debate among scholars, did the salt improve tree growth along the edges, or merely preserve the boundary like jerky? Sunlight pours down the ride in slanted bars, warming last night's chill that's still clinging to your ribs like a cat refusing eviction. An established fact, morning light, averaging 10,000 lux, resets circadian melatonin within 30 minutes. Cheaper than coffee, harder to sip. A forgotten custom, travelers paused at the first full bar of sun, turned pockets inside out, and let light disinfect lingering coin, an early audit without spreadsheets. Historians still argue, did the ritual reduce disease or merely give pickpockets a well-lit sharping window? You stop anyway, empty your pocket relics onto your palm, brass token, almond shell, pepper rose pouch. The token glints like it's auditioning for a new narrative. A well-documented detail, palace mint workers sometimes restamped old tokens to stretch metal supplies, creating hybrid coins that carried 2 histories in one face, numismatic palimpsests. An odd anecdote, one such double-stamped token was used to pay both a prostitute and, months later, a priest for last rites, salvation on layaway. The uncertainty, did the coin feel conflicted or simply well-traveled? A breeze riffles the pouch, releasing a sneeze-worthy waft. You pocket everything quickly, eyes watering, suddenly aware your body has opinions about nostalgia. An established fact, black pepper contains piperine, a compound that irritates mucous membranes and boosts dopamine. Basically nature's way of saying, cry and like it. A tidbit most wouldn't know, foresters used pepper-scented smoke to test wind direction before prescribed burns. Sneezing indicated updraft. Respiratory meteorology. The open question, if you sneeze alone in a clearing, does the wind update your coordinates or merely your mood? Ahead, the ride forks, left toward a distant rooftop glint, perhaps a hunting lodge, right into deeper green where morning hasn't filed its paperwork. You hesitate, feel the sun bar shift across your face like a gentle push, and choose right, figuring stories prefer shade when they're still tender. Behind you, linen strips and hoof prints recede into inventory, items checked off someone else's ledger. The path softens, needles underfoot, and you walk forward knowing that every step is an eraser and a pencil at the same time, writing absence, leaving possibility. The right-hand path swallows you in pine-filtered gloom, each footfall muffled by needles that have been rehearsing quiet since before your century learned to whisper. A widely accepted historical fact, royal foresters planted bands of Scots pine specifically to muffle hoofbeats during royal hunts, an acoustic curtain made of trees. A curious side note, the resin was harvested for perfume that smelled of cold smoke and crushed needles, marketed to courtiers as ode to silence, early niche marketing with forestry receipts. The debate among scholars, did wearers actually move quieter, or did they just feel too expensive to interrupt? Sunlight here arrives in thin, angled spears, stabbing dust motes that drift like tiny planets unsure whether to orbit you or simply flee. An established fact, dust in medieval forests was partly pollen, partly microscopic insect wings. Breathing it meant inhaling flight itself, a literal way to catch the morning. A forgotten custom, travelers caught a mote on their tongue, made a wish, then swallowed, belief being that if you digested flight, destiny had to carry you. Historians still argue, does ingesting ambition count if you burp halfway to your goal? You try it, tastes faintly of resin and last night's dream, wish for soft landings, swallow, and feel nothing but the mild embarrassment of being caught talking to dust. A well-documented detail, foresters called these motes angel crumbs, claiming they gathered where royal prayers had recently passed, proof that even monarchs shed dandruff. An odd anecdote, a poacher once collected angel crumbs on a damp cloth, presented the paste to a priest as holy relic. The priest blessed it, then used it to season soup, divine umami. The uncertainty, does sanctity survive digestion, or merely improve the broth? Ahead, the trees part around a mossy boulder split down the middle like a book left open by a giant who got bored mid-sentence. An established fact, glacial rocks served as waymarkers, their orientation indicating the nearest village, early GPS carved by ice instead of satellites. A tidbit most wouldn't know, split boulders were sometimes used as dead drops. Travelers left messages wedged in the crack, secured with a peppercorn bribe for the next passerby, spicy postage. The open question, if a message sits unread for centuries, does it become geology or merely very slow gossip? You approach the split, feel cool air exhale from the stone's dark seam, and notice a scrap of linen, fresh, white, tied to a root threading the crack. It flutters, not quite flag, not quite surrender. From your pocket you draw the brass token, hesitate, then wedge it into the seam beside the linen, metal meeting mineral, story meeting sediment. The linen brushes your knuckles goodbye, and you step back, aware you've just paid a toll whose amount you won't know until you arrive wherever this path decides you're going. Dust motes swirl, catch a sun's spear, vanish. Somewhere behind you, a pine cone drops, the softest possible applause. You walk on, lighter by one token, heavier by the wish you swallowed, balanced between what you've spent and what you still owe the morning. The path tilts downward, pine giving way to beech again, their smooth trunks pale as unwritten parchment. You catch yourself touching one, thumb brushing a scar you didn't put there, someone else's thumbprint from years, maybe centuries ago. A generally acknowledged truth, beech bark preserves fingerprints for decades, a guest book no one owns but everyone signs. A curious side note, foresters call these marks borrowed signatures, proof that ownership of trees is negotiable. The debate among scholars, does the tree remember the touch, or is memory reserved for the toucher alone? Your own print sits beside a fainter ridge, older, smaller, possibly a woman's. An established fact, medieval women pressed fingers into bark while petitioning St. Eustace, patron of hunters, hoping to track wayward husbands early find my spouse. A forgotten custom. If the ridge healed smooth within a year, the husband was deemed reformed. If it remained, the hunt continued. Arboreal marriage counseling. Historians still argue, did more marriages survive because of hope or because bark regenerates slowly? You walk on, fingers tingling with borrowed contact, and the forest opens into a sunlit glade where a charcoal burner's hut squats, chimney puffing lace-edged smoke. A well-documented detail, hut doors always faced east to catch first light and last warmth, a compass of practicality over superstition. An odd anecdote, one burner painted a tiny belt above his door for luck, claiming it tempted the wind to behave. Forestry meets flirting. The uncertainty, did the wind feel flattered or merely negotiated with? The burner himself appears, elderly, soot-lashed, eyes the color of rain-washed ash. An established fact, charcoal workers were legally exempt from city gate taxes, their trade considered essential infrastructure, like water or gossip. A tidbit most wouldn't know, they paid instead with stories, required to tell the gatekeeper a new tale each entry, traveling TED talks in soot. The open question, who audited the stories for novelty, and were repeat punchlines find? He nods, notices the linen strip you still wear tied to your belt loop, leftover credential from the brothel courtyard, and smiles as if recognizing currency from a neighboring dream. Wordlessly, he offers a cup watered wine, faintly resinous, tasting of pine and pennies. You sip, feel the road's dust settle inside you, a quieting of internal gravel. He raises an eyebrow, your turn to pay the tail tax. You inhale, begin speaking, and realize you're starting with the golden buckle, the pepper, the almond, the wish. Words come without invoice, sentences soft as charcoal ash. The burner listens, occasionally feeding a stick to his fire, the smoke curling like a stenographer taking dictation in cursive. When you finish, he nods once, satisfied, and points through the trees to where the road reappears, a lighter stripe among shadows. You leave the cup, keep the story, and step back into daylight, lighter by narrative, heavier by witness, the glade closing behind you like a book that trusts you'll return for the sequel. Back on the road, the forest thins into hedgerow country, each hawthorn bush wearing lace-edged blossoms like collars borrowed from a wedding you weren't invited to. A widely accepted historical fact, hawthorn flowers were banned from indoor bouquets because their scent was said to mask the odor of impending death, Victorian morbidity, in petal form. A curious side note, travelers pinned a single blossom to their cloak as a road passport, the smell signaling they carried no plague, olfactory TSA. The debate among scholars, did the flower actually deter disease, or merely discourage close conversation long enough to stay healthy? Your blossom, already wilting, releases a sweetness that makes you think of bread cooling in a courtyard you may have dreamed. An established fact, hawthorn contains trimethylamine, the same compound produced by the human heart under stress, flowers that smell like worry. A forgotten custom, if the blossom dropped before you reached the next village, you were obliged to confess one worry aloud to the dirt, early talk therapy for the price of a petal. Historians still argue, did the dirt listen, or simply file the complaint under compost? Ahead, the road dips toward a stone bridge no wider than a cart, its parapet mossy as forgotten cheese. A well-documented detail, parish bridges often doubled as chapels. Masons carved a tiny niche for St. Christopher, patron of sudden drownings and questionable itineraries. An odd anecdote, one niche held a brass belt buckle instead of a saint, donated by a repentant merchant who claimed it had guided him to the wrong bed. Navigation by lingerie. The uncertainty, did the buckle bless travelers, or merely remind them to update their maps? You pause at the apex, peer over. The stream below is shallow, chatty, negotiating stones like a broker haggling futures in pebble futures. An established fact, water this clear averages a visibility of 2 meters, enough to spot any regrets you dropped upstream. A tidbit most wouldn't know, bridge tolls were sometimes paid by tossing a peppercorn into the water. If it floated, your crossing was blessed. If it sank, you owed an extra prayer. Hydraulic slot machine. The open question, who collected the sunk prayers, and did they ever cash them in? From your pocket you draw the last pinch of pepper rose blend, let it rain into the current. The flakes swirl, some float, some dive, taking your measurable sins and immeasurable wishes with them. You watch until every speck disappears, either blessed or indebted, hard to tell. Behind you, cartwheels clatter. A farmer approaches, humming the same tune the city cart had, proof that melodies commute farther than wages. You step aside, he nods, and the bridge exhales under his weight, a brief sigh of stone accepting its daily rent of vibration. As his cart rolls off, you follow, lighter by one more relic, heavier by the knowledge that rivers keep better books than most monasteries. The road continues, straight now, fields opening like pages freshly scraped for illumination, and you walk forward, a margin note in someone else's manuscript, waiting for the next marginalia to appear. The road straightens into a ribbon of packed chalk, pale enough to reflect sunlight back onto your face like a polite interrogation. Fields on either side ripple with young wheat, each gust producing a hush that sounds uncannily like the city's pink lanterns snuffing out, proof that geography can echo gossip. A widely accepted historical fact, Parisian wheat was milled within 48 hours of harvest to prevent spontaneous fermentation, keeping bread from turning into accidental beer. A curious side note, peasants sometimes let a sheaf ferment on purpose, brewing a weak ale called straw wine that tasted of damp homework. DIY happy hour. The debate among scholars, did the brew reduce grain surplus, or merely increase willingness to harvest more? Your shadow lengthens, partnering you with an elongated twin who seems to know where he's going and refuses to wait. An established fact, shadows at mid-morning stretch at a ratio of 21, useful for estimating distance to the next village without asking directions. Medieval GPS requiring only sun and self-esteem. A forgotten custom, if your shadow stepped on a roadside cross first, you were obliged to recite one paternoster before proceeding. Foot-based penance. Historians still argue, did the rule slow traffic or merely give bandits time to inventory victims? Ahead, a milestone appears. Stone, waist-high, etched with a tiny belt and the numeral Roman 7, distance in Roman miles to the next town. A well-documented detail, milestones near Paris, sometimes displayed symbols from city guilds, advertising services before you arrived, highway billboards carved by civil servants. An odd anecdote, a miller once bribed a stone carver to add a peppercorn symbol, claiming it represented freshness. Travelers misread it as sneeze here, and the village became famous for allergy cures, cartographic typo as marketing. The uncertainty, did the miller profit more from flour or from seasonal sinus sufferers? You trace the belt carving, feel chalk dust settle into the walls of your thumb, temporary tattoo of a story you're not ready to wash off. An established fact, chalk is compressed coccoliths, tiny ancient shells. So you're essentially rubbing skeletons against skin, geology flirting with biology. A tidbit most wouldn't know, medieval scribes used chalk to stabilize ink on vellum. By touching the milestone, you're technically priming yourself to be written on, palimpsest in sneakers. The open question, who authors the next layer, and do you get editorial approval? A lark erupts from the wheat, trilling like a dropped string of pearls. You follow its ascent until it vanishes into sky-blue anonymity, leaving only sound. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Paris bells ring terse, the third office, floating faint but familiar, a tether made of bronze and memory. You realize the city hasn't let go. It's simply paying out rope, anchoring you to every place you'll walk. Milestone chalk coats your fingers, wheat hush fills your ears, and you step forward, leaving a footprint that will crumble by sunset but still counts as punctuation in the field's long sentence. The road accepts your claws, adds a karma of dust, and invites the next stanza to follow. The wheat sea parts around a low stone chapel, no bigger than a roadside pause in a conversation. Its door stands open like a mouth mid-sentence, breathing cool air that smells of candle smoke older than the candles currently burning. A widely accepted historical fact, chantry chapels outside Paris were endowed by guilds to pray for members' souls. Spiritual subscription boxes paid in perpetuity. A curious side note, the Beltmakers Guild funded this one, carving a tiny girdle into the keystone instead of a cross. Salvation branded. The debate among scholars, does sacred imagery retain holiness when it doubles as corporate logo, or does God simply appreciate good craftsmanship? Inside, 3 pews, 1 kneeler, and a fresco of Saint Susanna. Eyes raised, hand resting on a stone belt that looks suspiciously familiar. An established fact, Saint Susanna of Rome was martyred for refusing to marry a philandering senator, making her patron of both chastity and difficult negotiations. Useful resume in multiple industries. A forgotten custom, courtesans on pilgrimage left a peppercorn at her feet, asking protection from dangerous clients, spice as spiritual pepper spray. Historians still argue, did the saint approve the irony, or was she too busy fielding senators? You kneel, not from piety, but because the floor invites it, cool flagstones pressing against your knees like editors demanding concision. From your pocket, you withdraw the last intact peppercorn, roll it between fingers still chalk dusted from the milestone. A well-documented detail, single peppercorns were sometimes hollowed, filled with written wishes, then sealed with wax, Trojan seasoning. An odd anecdote. A 14th century poem tells of a nun who swallowed such a peppercorn and spoke only truth for a week, until indigestion set her free. Metaphor with gastrointestinal consequences. The uncertainty, does truth reside in pepper, or in the courage to season your own tongue? You place the peppercorn on the ledge beneath the fresco. It sits there, small and dark, a bullet of spice that never learned to lie. An established fact, capsaicin stimulates endorphins, but black pepper's piperine sharpens cognition. Brain polish in granular form. A tidbit most wouldn't know, scribes chewed pepper before copying tricky manuscripts, claiming it dotted their eyes with honesty, seasonal copy editing. The open question once offered, does the spice bless the saint or the offerer, and who sneezes first? Behind you, the door creaks. A priest appears, robed in faded blue, the exact shade of dawn's last concession. He notices the peppercorn, smiles the small smile of someone who recognizes currency from a neighboring dream, and nods permission for you to stay or go, both equal in his economy. You stand, knees popping like small bells announcing the end of a private office, Outside, wheat has shifted from green to gold in the time it took to kneel, proving fields keep faster clocks than chapels. You step back onto the road, lighter by one peppercorn, heavier by whatever truth you may have swallowed mid-sentence. The chapel door closes softly, editing you out of its scene while ahead the road continues, punctuation now entirely up to you. Back under open sky, the road tips downward into a shallow valley where a mill pond waits, its skin reflecting clouds like slow-moving subtitles for the sky. A widely accepted historical fact, mill ponds within a day's walk of Paris were required to display a colored flag indicating grain availability, traffic lights for bread. A curious side note, the flagpole doubled as a public notice board. Bakers tacked pleas for lost pepper or found virtue beside royal edicts. Medieval community bored with flowery fingerprints. The debate among scholars, did anyone actually return lost virtue or merely post disclaimers about mislabeling? The mill wheel creaks, turning in measured gulps, each bucket spilling a small applause that echoes your heartbeat slower. An established fact, water-powered millstones averaged 120 revolutions per minute, identical to the resting human heart, machinery mimicking biology centuries before cardiologists clocked in. A forgotten custom, travelers placed a hand on the wheel housing for one full turn, believing the rhythm reset wandering pulses. Stone Age smartwatch. Historians still argue, did the practice calm bodies or merely give them an excuse to linger near the bakery smell? You comply, palm against warm wood, feeling the mill's heartbeat sync with yours until both feel borrowed from the same enormous creature. A well-documented detail. Millers kept a cup of flour by the door. Visitors could taste next day bread by dipping a finger. Preview of future comfort. An odd anecdote. One insomniac noble swore the raw flour cured his sleeplessness. He bought sacks, stuffed his pillow, and reportedly dreamed of wheat fields whispering lullabies. Carbohydrate cradle. The uncertainty, did he sleep better from texture, gluten, or the simple knowledge he'd paid for the story? The miller emerges, flour dusted to the elbows, eyes bright as new coins. An established fact, medieval millers were often ex-bakers with bad backs. They understood both sides of the loaf and charged accordingly. A tidbit most wouldn't know. Some accepted pepper as payment, grinding it with grain to produce spice bread sold at fairs. Profit needed twice. The open question, if your bread sneezes, do you owe royalties to the pepper or to the dream that seasoned it? You offer your last almond shell, empty now, but still shaped like a boat. He accepts it gravely, sets it atop the flour cup like a tiny vessel waiting to ferry yesterday across tomorrow's batter. In exchange, he hands you a hot flat cake, edges blistered, smelling of noon and forgiveness. You tear it, steam curling upward, and realize you're eating the same wheat that waved at you outside the chapel, now transformed by fire and patience. The first bite tastes of pepper you can't see, rose you can't name, and the soft resignation of stories that know when they're ending. You chew, swallow, and feel the road inside you settle, a weightless fullness that promises you can walk the remaining miles without looking back more than once. You leave the mill wheel applauding behind you, flat cake warmth nestled against your ribs like a small, negotiable sun. The road climbs again, gentler now, fields giving way to orchard rose that smell of bruised apple and early cider. A widely accepted historical fact, Parisian cider orchards were taxed by the crown at a rate of 1 barrel per 10, making drunkenness a partial civic duty. A curious side note, some growers slipped a peppercorn into each tax barrel, claiming it preserved the crown's palate. seasonal sarcasm aged to taste. The debate among scholars: did the king ever sneeze mid-sip, or merely raise an eyebrow and charge the orchard extra for entertainment? Your stride shortens, not from fatigue but from reluctance to let the story end before you found a place to shelve it. An established fact: human walking speed averages 5 kilometers per hour, yet perception stretches time when destination is unknown. Physics agreeing with poets. A forgotten custom: travelers counted orchard rows aloud, stopping at the 7th to whisper the day's truest sentence to the bark. Arboreal confession with fruity witnesses. Historians still argue: did the trees repeat the secrets, or simply ferment them into next year's harvest? At row 7 you stop, palm against rough bark, and realize your truest sentence is simply, "I was here, and it mattered." You say it aloud. The orchard absorbs it like drizzle, indifferent yet storing. A well-documented detail: apple wood was favored for carving prayer beads because it held scent longest, rosary that remembered fingers. An odd anecdote: one ex-courtesan carved a belt buckle-sized bead, wore it hidden beneath her gown, and claimed it smelled of both pepper and dawn, portable chapel. The uncertainty: did the bead grant absolution, or merely provide something to hold when absolution was late? Beyond the last row, the road crests a low hill where wind arrives in one clean sweep, carrying smells of river, distant bread, and the faintest suggestion of city smoke. Paris checking in like a friend who promises not to gossip, but will definitely mention you were seen. An established fact: visibility from this ridge extends 12 kilometers on a clear day, roughly the distance a healthy traveler covers between dawn and dinner. A tidbit most wouldn't know: pilgrims used to turn their back to the city, close eyes, and spin 3 times. Wherever they stopped pointed the direction their story should spread. Compass made of dizziness. The open question: if you spin long enough, do you face the past or simply the next retelling? You spin once, twice, thrice. Stop facing west, where the sun is beginning its descent in a hush of gold that feels suspiciously like a buckle loosening. Below, the road continues, but the hilltop feels concluded, a paragraph happy with its period. You sit, let the flat cake finish cooling inside you, and realize you carry no more tokens, no more pepper, only the sentence you gave the apple tree and the heartbeat you borrowed from a mill wheel. That, and the soft weight of someone else's gold that once rested on your chest like a sun deciding whether to rise. You breathe, exhale, and feel the story settle, complete yet portable, ready to be retold in whatever kitchen, tavern, or dream requires a gentle, sneeze-worthy history to help another traveler fall softly asleep. The wind across the ridge gentles, carrying the last warmth of a sun that now rests like a coin pressed into the palm of the horizon. You sit a moment longer, letting the orchard, the mill, the orchard again, settle into the same rhythm your heart finally recognizes as its own. A generally acknowledged truth: stories told aloud shrink by 1/3 with each retelling, but stories carried quietly expand to fit the available silence. A curious side note: medieval storytellers measured tales not by length, but by heartbeat. When the listener's pulse matched the teller's, the tale was considered true enough to borrow. The debate among scholars: does borrowed truth need to be returned, or does it simply wear new fingerprints? You exhale, feel your pulse slow to match the distant mill wheel still turning in memory, and decide that true enough is plenty. From your pocket you draw only air, let it drift open, palm up, a gesture of closure that requires no props. An established fact: releasing an empty hand tricks the brain into registering completion, a sleight of mind older than prayer. A forgotten custom. Travelers leaving a ridge would blow across their palm toward home, sending the day's dust ahead so the house could prepare excuses. Early voicemail made of skin and breeze. Historians still argue, did the dust arrive, or merely the idea that excuses were now communal property? Below, the first lamp of a village winks awake, a small orange spark that feels like the city's pink lantern after a long, educational holiday. You stand, brush grass from your cloak, and begin the descent, each footfall a soft punctuation mark in a story that has agreed to let you leave while it keeps talking to itself. Behind you, the apple rows hush, the mill wheel applauds once more in distant memory, and the ridge remains, patient librarian of every sentence you whispered into its bark. Ahead, the road curves into twilight, but your stride stays easy, cushioned by the knowledge that you now carry a tale soft enough to sleep on, spicy enough to sneeze at, and short enough to finish before the next dream begins. You walk on, lighter than when you arrived, heavier with the kind of weight that only stories know how to distribute. Equal parts gold, pepper, and the exact moment someone told you the night would hold you safe. The road levels, darkness settling like a blanket someone shakes once and lets drift. Your breathing finds the cadence of the mill wheel again, slow, circular, finished. Each exhale releases another detail you no longer need to hold, the pink lantern, the peppercorn, the buckle's borrowed heartbeat. They drift behind you like loose threads, too light to snag. You imagine the city folding itself shut for the night, Susanna hanging the golden belt on its peg, the orchard sealing your sentence into next year's fruit. Somewhere, a peppercorn dissolves in stream water, carrying the last wish toward a sea that accepts all currencies. Your steps soften, heel-toe, the way a parent rocks a cradle. Eyelids follow, descending in gentle increments. The story has done its work. It carried you, it seasoned you, it let you go. Picture the ridge now, moon-washed, quiet, applewood-breathing nighttime resin into the stars. Nothing moves except the steady rise and fall of your own chest, a small tide that knows the exact distance between history and sleep. Let that tide carry you. Let the mill wheel slow to a whisper, then to nothing. Let the golden belt rest, the pepper settle, the almond boat float gently into darkness. There is nothing left to spend, nothing left to prove. Breathe in, smoke, bread, river, pine. Breathe out, release. The road continues, but you have arrived at the place where stories end and breathing begins.